Members now have 5 minutes to ask our witnesses questions. I'm going to start. I don't profess to be an expert on anything, except perhaps one thing, airplanes. As a member of Congress, I've spent more time on airplanes than most Americans, and I know a little bit about it. It led me a few years back to conceive of the notion of banning smoking on airplanes. We passed that legislation. Frank Lautenberg was a sponsor in the Senate. But I've come to understand something recently on this issue and airlines that I didn't realize before. It turns out that most of the airlines make more money off the credit card branded credit cards and frequent flyer programs than they do off their air operations. If you look closely at the balance sheet, it turns out that they're not airlines, they're banks that own airplanes. And when it comes down to the profit making, it takes a credit card to lead the way each year, and it means a change in the way we fly on airplanes. Remember those flight attendants? We count on them. What are they there for? Safety, more than anything else. That's what they're there for. They give us a little Diet Coke along the way, but they're there for safety. Did you notice recently that things changed on a lot of airplanes? Once they made their warning announcements and you're buckled in, they start talking to you about their credit card and how you ought to consider buying one of their credit cards, and the flight attendant is going to go up and down the aisle passing out brochures for their new credit card. It really tells the story of what's a priority when it comes to these airlines. And so the question I have in my mind is, why do they sound like shrieking, scalded cats when I hear about consumer competition on credit cards? Why does this scare the living hell out of them? Because they make so much money off them right now. Well, is the converse true? With this regulation and this competition when it comes to interchange fees, change the equation so much that they couldn't be profitable? I use as an illustration the fact that the credit cards are regulated in Europe and the interchange fee is capped at 0.3%. Try to remember that number for a moment. 0.3% interchange fee in Europe for Visa and MasterCard and those who participate in that. What is it in the United States? 1 to 3%. Well, if I can remember basic math, what you're saying is in the United States, the interchange fee is 3 to 10 times as much as it is in Europe. How do they get by with that? How can Visa and MasterCard possibly survive with such a difference, contrast? The bottom line, of course, is that they are profitable in Europe even when restricted to 0.3% in interchange fees. And it also is very clear that when it comes to these interchange fees and the frequent flyer programs, they're still offering them in Europe. So to me, as I sit here and take a look at the situation, the obvious question I ask Mr. Sheedy is, how can you possibly do business in Europe when the interchange fee is restricted a maximum of 0.3%?
Thank you, Senator Durbin. You're correct. The European government did regulate interchange rates in Europe. The government in Europe imposed a fixed interchange fee, and it did impact the market. While you're correct that there are some reward programs in Europe, the majority of them were either eliminated or greatly devalued. Consumer rewards, which are enjoyed by 84% of U.S. cardholders today. So it's a broad spectrum, broad socioeconomic spectrum of U.S. consumers enjoy rewards. That is not the case in Europe, where reward programs have been reduced, fees to consumers have gone up. You're correct, the market adjusted, but ultimately we think that those changes that happened in Europe were bad for European consumers and European cardholders.
Let me ask you a question about an individual. Show the chart. Are you familiar with Mr. Prabhu, Mr. Sheedy?
Yes, he used to be the chief financial officer of Visa.
He said, net, we are a beneficiary of inflation. Visa was a beneficiary. How is that possible?
I don't think of Visa as being a beneficiary of of inflation. Excuse me. It's impossible for me to know the context within which Vasant
So
made
let me
that
read
statement.
a larger part of the quote. To the extent that there's inflation driving up ticket size, clearly it's beneficial to us, he said, on behalf of Visa. So net, I mean, we are a beneficiary of inflation. So while American families are struggling to survive against inflation, you're doing quite well, as long as the ticket size goes up and your percentage applies, correct?
I don't believe that inflation is good for our business or anyone's business. I think a healthy economy is best for the U.S. consumer, U.S. merchants, and when U.S. merchants and U.S. consumers come together and transact, that drives transactions on our network. That's what we want, and that's how we think about growing the business.
Well, I can tell you that the CFO of your company, January 27th, 2022, had a different point of view and one that makes more sense. You're in a situation where you're benefiting from the weakness in our economy and the fact that its impact on Mr. Callahan as well as families and consumers. What we're trying to do here is to do something you said you would favor. Competition benefits everyone. Why not some competition for Visa and MasterCard?